if you think about films, British films at the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s, the new wave and the discovery of the world of the northern working class, this is a film that gets to grips with the consequences of that discovery, that tells you about what happened to those people when they stopped letting the bastards grind them down, when they got out of the factories, when they embraced those possibilities for social mobility that the 60s seemed to be offering. And it's a bitter film, and it's a bitter lesson about that kind of social progress, because Michael Marler, the character at the heart of this story, has had to leave so much behind in order to achieve what he's achieved. And he's hollowed himself out somehow. He's poisoned himself. And I think that a lot of the people in the audience for this film would have resonated with that. There was a whole generation of British people, particularly British men in this period, who would have been the first person in their family to go to university at the beginning of the 60s, would have had opportunities that their fathers wouldn't have had. People breaking out of those terrace houses that were being so enthusiastically knocked down in the 60s, and escaping that world. There's a whole kind of strain of British fiction and filmmaking that embodies the idea of getting out of the north and going to London. Think of Rita Tushingham in Smashing Time, going down, larking about, discovering Carnaby Street and the swinging 60s and all of that. And all of those Joe Lampton figures in the cinema of the early 60s, wanting to break out of that world. And that is what people did. That is what that generation did. And in doing so, they gained things and they lost things. They found themselves estranged from the parents they'd left behind. All of these grammar school boys who then went to Oxbridge universities or to red brick universities found that when they went home, their parents didn't know what they were talking about, or they were embarrassed by their parents. That's the experience of all those 60s writers that we love so much. That's what Dennis Potter's writing is about, for instance. This generational problem of having embraced these opportunities and then found that when you go back home, you're not really at home. You've lost something. And your relationship with your background has become incredibly ambivalent. Jack Gold is a really good example of the kind of director who comes forward in this period, trained in television, and he began on The Tonight Show, which was the ancient forerunner of The One Show, really, I guess, magazine programme for early evening consumption on the BBC. And he starts to do those kind of little comic films that were broadcast in that slot that were rather well observed. And from that he graduated to the Wednesday play. So he's a beneficiary of that great kind of influx of energy that comes into the BBC at the beginning of the 60s, when they are terrified that ITV is going to destroy them, and that 20 million people are watching Sunday night at the London Palladium, but nobody is watching what's on the BBC at that time. So in response to this, they poach Sidney Newman, actually, the head of drama at ABC, and they bring him in to shake up the BBC's drama department. And one of the products of this is the Wednesday play, this strand that is set up in order to get to grips with stories from contemporary Britain, stories about real people, real lives. This is dismissed as kitchen sink drama, or celebrated, I suppose, as kitchen sink drama by many in the period. But it's an attempt to really tell stories, to shy away from things like literary adaptation and try to tell stories about people's ordinary lives. Ken Loach is a graduate of this. Kenneth Trodd, the producer, is working in this milieu, and John McGrath as well, who's the scriptwriter of The Reckoning. So you've got this group of people who are quite politically committed, rather left-wing. In fact, some of them even dabbling with Jerry Healey and British Trotskyism and this kind of thing. But it's really a kind of invigoration of British drama, and of course it works its way into British film as well. So these are not quite, this is not quite like the Lindsay Anderson, Schlesinger new wave of the late 50s and early 60s. There are kind of cross currents here. So this is a film made under the influence of the Royal Court, where certain personnel in it have come from, and also the Wednesday play as well. So it's taking that kind of late 50s impulse and developing it further and into maybe slightly more bitter and disillusioned places than those other stories would go. Nicol Williamson is one of those actors who, in a way, was almost as known for his personal ferocity as he was for doing anything on the stage or the screen. And these things were all kind of mixed up together in how he was perceived by audiences and by critics and by actors and producers as well. He occupies a strange position in the history of British acting, because it was often said that aggression inside him held him back, and certainly he behaved very badly to all kinds of people. I mean, he would undermine actors, he would threaten them with violence sometimes. He was clearly, many people found him very, very difficult to be around. But this is the secret of his greatness too. And so while it put a kind of cap on his career, but it was also the reason why he was celebrated and the reason why he was an interesting actor. And the performance, I think, divided people. I was looking at some of the reviews for the picture, and there seems to be a very strong gender divide on how his performance as Marlowe in The Reckoning was perceived. Male critics celebrating him as the hero of the moment. You know, this is a man of our time. All this aggression, all of this rage, rather admired by some people who wrote about this. And then Margaret Hinksman in The Telegraph, for instance, being rather withering about this tiresome, bullying, self-pitying performance. And in a way, I think, you know, this does conjure something about what was happening in the period. These figures, like the Albert Finney character in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, were celebrated. The angry young man was an elevated kind of figure, but he was also a pretty tiresome and ridiculous figure as well, a figure who was difficult to spend time around. And there was always that his heroism was never uncomplicated, really. And I think what you've got in Williamson's performance here is a kind of acknowledgement of the awfulness of all of this, the personal cost. This is a portrait of a man who's kind of dissolving before our eyes, really. But everybody in this film was going completely nuts, really, I think, while it was being made. It's a record of characters who are trapped and who are stuck in these rather toxic environments, who don't really understand how they got to where they got, or the cost that they've had to carry for it. But I think in some ways, I mean, if you put what's happening on screen in the context of what was happening to the principal actors in the film, then I don't know whether life is imitating art, but certainly life and art are running in parallel to some extent. Rachel Roberts was herself stuck in a collapsing marriage to Rex Harrison. She was Rex Harrison's fourth wife. And this script became a point of contention between them. She was with him in Paris while he was making a film there. And she had made some attempt, I think, to completely give up acting and just be Rex Harrison's wife. And Harrison was very disapproving of the choice of this script. It came her way. And in a way, it's a script that is asking her to do something that she's done before. I mean, she was the older woman with whom Albert Finney has his affair in Saturday Night and Sunday Morning. She played a similar role in This Sporting Life. So she's often the other woman in films of this period. And here she is, in a way, returning to a rather similar character. And Harrison was very disdainful about what he called political films, which, you know, for which read social realism. He was doing Dr. Dolittle at the time, so he was a long, long way from this world, and he didn't really want his wife to be associated with it. And the marriage was in real trouble anyway. I mean, Roberts was a drinker. This is no secret. She had a very erratic personality. She was clearly deeply unhappy. She was an incredibly intense person. I think you can see that in her roles. But she was basically coming apart at the seams while this film was being made, and had been doing so in the period before, wanting very much to stay married to Harrison, but resenting his behaviour towards her. So this is at a very unusual moment in her life. It's a break moment in her life, so that she's moved back to Britain, away from Hollywood. She's screaming inside, just like Michael Marley is, because she, in a way, has to work as the comfort to the Marla character here. But we know that she must be as angry as him, that both Rachel Roberts is as angry as him, and maybe her character is too. It's shocking that it disappeared from the radar for so long, but because so much in it that's so rich and so powerful and has such a bloody raw edge to it. This is not a pretty film. It's a very raw film, and it's one of those films that puts you back into Britain at that moment as well. Get Carter is a little bit away at this point, but actually they're getting a foretaste of the bleakness of Get Carter and its picture of the North as well. I mean, there's a terrific sequence in The Reckoning where Marla knows that his father is dying, but has to stay in the office to do this report about adding machines and computers. He works for this firm. And then he goes on this breakneck journey up to Liverpool. And then you're into that world, a world that you can now only see in The Reckoning, because almost every building you see in The Reckoning has now been knocked down. The street where he lives was demolished. Even the tower block, the representation of modernity in that film, that's gone too. So you're really looking at a vanished world. And I mean, I think one of the most affecting sequences in it is when he goes back to this house. And this is not, this is working class life portrayed unsensationally. We don't have any, it's not kind of exaggeratedly awful, but it's also not that rather over-coloured version of working class life that you get in some colour films of this period where, for instance, even, the Steptoe's yard looks too pretty in colour. But these houses in Liverpool don't, they look just right. And he goes up to his father's bedroom and realises that he stayed too long in the office, and that he won't see him alive again, and there he is, dead in the bed. And he moves out of the house. Malcolm Arnold's soundtrack comes alive with the Irish song that's been playing in this character's mind, because this film is in part about how you can't really escape your roots. And Marla has been in London, he's been hiding his Irishness. His wife, Anne Bell, calls him a paddywhack, I think, knows about this part of his, knows where he came from, but nobody in his professional life does. So he's been passing as something else. And that flowers at this moment as he walks out of this house. And there's a beautiful moment when we follow him backwards down this alley. And it answers a moment, it sets up something that's answered later in the film when Marla goes to this party that his wife has held in their house in Virginia Water. I mean, can you imagine a more effective way of conjuring the kind of the boring bleakness of wealth in the late 60s and early 70s than their sprawling, boxy ranch-style house in Virginia Water, the place where General Pinochet and Russ Abbott would later go on to live. And so he's in the middle of this room of people who don't know who he is, really. And he bursts into this rebel song. This is a song about the English army executing a member of the IRA. And my God, in 1970, that would have carried a bit of a charge. Because, 69 is when really the Troubles begin in earnest. And so I think probably even during the time of its production, that scene acquired a kind of crackle that it wouldn't have had if it had been produced a year or so earlier. one of the really powerful sequences in The Reckoning is a moment when Marla, on the day of his father's death, goes out in the evening to this club where a wrestling match is being staged. And it's an incredibly raucous place, and it's presented with utter unsentimentality. It's pictured, I think, exactly as, I feel it's almost potato printed from life, that everybody looks terrible. Everybody, the women have this terrible makeup, and the men look incredibly sleazy. You can almost smell the BO on those people. And in the middle of all, you've got a wrestling match of quite some ferocious violence. This is not played for laughs. This is not a comic scene. And in the middle of that wrestling match, there's a rather interesting figure taking part in that. Spencer Churchill is his name, a bodybuilder and wrestler who was slightly past his prime at that point, a former Mr. Universe, I think, and also a model for the artist John Minton, who he used to go around the continent, Barcelona and probably Tangiers as well with. So he's, this is one of the fascinating things about films for this period. There's never anybody boring even in the background. I think The Reckoning is one of those films that registers the end of the 60s, and it perhaps registers the failure of the project that the New Wave seems to be setting up. I mean, most of the New Wave films have pretty bleak endings. Let's not pretend that the end of A Taste of Honey is much cause for celebration. That's as glacially cold as the end of The Reckoning. But I think if we look at the films of the beginning of the 60s and the end of the 50s, and films like The Reckoning and Get Carter and Charlie Bubbles, perhaps, you've got this sense of the early films of what happens when you leave, the later films about what happens when you come back. And so you've got the 60s set up almost as this kind of, as like the Forest of Arden, somewhere that you've run away to, but you maybe have to come back from to face life at the end. And there's the sense of the party being over, the holiday being over, and hope being over too. So that Get Carter and The Reckoning offer this very bleak picture of what happens when you go back to your past. You either go back to, have a reckoning with your past, or the novel that Get Carter was based on was called Jack's Return Home. The idea of what happens when Jack returns home and finds that it's a kind of hell, really, or at least a kind of limbo. So the question is, where do you go from there? And perhaps that does signal that the 70s for British cinema are going to be much more nihilistic than the 60s are. They're going to be much more lo-fi and grimy. They have to be, because all the American money is bleeding out at the moment when this is made. And so we're moving towards a grungier, punkier, more despairing kind of world.